best for you.
Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, give me 1 second just while I get myself set up. All right, so thank you for having me. Welcome, everybody. My name is Elizabeth. My friends call me E, so you can too. This is a presentation called New Disaster Coordinator Mentorship to Success. So I just want you to take a minute and imagine that you're stepping into your first day as a new disaster coordinator. You're handed binders full of plans, acronyms you don't recognize, and the unspoken pressure of knowing lives may depend on the decisions you make. Now imagine you're not alone. You have someone at your side who has walked this path before. That's the power of mentorship. And today, we'll explore how it transforms individuals, organizations, and communities in the field of emergency management. Good afternoon, everybody. As I said, my name is Elizabeth. My friends call me E, so you can too. I am the Emergency Preparedness Coordinator at Mammoth Hospital in Mammoth Lakes, California. We are in the central California area and our county boundaries, Nevada. We are a rural community, and a 17-bed hospital. We are about 40 miles from the next hospital and a life flight away from the next closest higher level trauma center. Today I'll be presenting this presentation. My partner, Emma, who is not available today, you see her on the screen. I'll give her introduction as well. She is an emergency management consultant with Wilcox Emergency Management Consulting, LLC. And today we'll share, or I'll share our 5-year mentorship relationship experience, along with research across disciplines, showing how mentorship, grounded in reciprocity, mutual respect, shared values, clear expectations, and genuine personal connection can be the greatest tool in an emergency manager's toolbox. And the principles I'll share today are not just abstract, they directly shape how we grow as leaders in crisis. So we'll take a look at the roadmap for where we're headed today. Topics that we'll cover here, mentorship characteristics, program development, the benefits of a mentorship, and developing a program. And then ultimately, I'll introduce you to our initial action plan for new emergency managers. Each piece of this presentation reflects a bridge between theory and practice, with research guiding us on what makes mentorship thrive. But before we dive into frameworks and theory, we will ground ourselves in one important question. What is a mentor exactly? And so I'd like to just ask the group that's here in attendance today, and you can answer in the chat. First question. Of the people here in this presentation, have you ever participated in a mentor-mentee relationship, whether as a mentor or a mentee in either your personal or professional life? And yes or no is perfectly fine to answer if anybody wants to throw their answer in the chat. Okay, great. It looks like a number of people have participated as a mentor or mentee, facilitated a program. That's great. Okay, a few people who haven't. Wonderful. And second question, of the people in this presentation today, who by either in the comments or even raising a hand is new to the role of emergency manager or emergency preparedness coordinator or something similar of that nature? Okay, a couple new people here. Okay, perfect. We have a consultant in the room and a student. Wonderful. So a great mix of both new and experienced professionals in emergency management. Okay, so, for those of you who either have or haven't been in a mentor-mentee relationship or are new or experienced in emergency management, As we move through this presentation, my hope is that you consider whether or not a mentor-mentee relationship might benefit your role or your emergency management program as it stands right now. And in my experience, a mentor is more than a teacher. They're a trusted advisor, a role model, and an advocate. In the emergency management field, this role takes on extra weight because the decisions that we make affect entire facilities, programs, and communities. And this was very clear to me when I first joined my role as the emergency preparedness coordinator at Mammoth Hospital. A little bit about my background. I had lots of skill sets that applied to emergency management. I came from an event management background. I also worked in the training and education space for quite a long time before I joined the healthcare space. But I didn't actually have any emergency management training or field experience. So I was very, very green. And the hiring manager at the time at the hospital offered me the position based on the fact that I had the appropriate skill sets. But she hired me with the caveat that I'd be training with an offsite, highly experienced emergency manager to fast track my growth in the role. And this was integral to my success. And so, what are the qualities that truly define an effective mentor? Let's explore. So, what is a mentor? Research shows that mentees describe successful mentors as enthusiastic, compassionate, and available. This is also noted as outstanding mentors have the opportunities to leave legacies. And mentees flourish when expectations are clear and values are shared between parties. Mentors who tailor their support and invest consistent time create stronger, more enduring relationships. And great mentors don't just share their experience, but they embody empathy, integrity, and vision. And so these personal qualities are what mentees value most, even above technical knowledge. And you can see here from some of the research, the definition of a mentor is similar in all three of these points. It can be a staff person who offers their wisdom or experience to help others enhance or advance their careers. It can be an individual with advanced experience and knowledge who is committed to providing upward mobility and career support to a less experienced individual. Or it can be a trusted advisor who guides, supports, and encourages a mentee in their professional or personal development. And the example shown here on the slide, an experienced project manager mentoring a junior team member, that can be in any kind of professional setting. When we think about a hospital setting, mentor-mentee relationships do exist, particularly in the nursing field. Typically, a new nurse is paired with a more experienced nurse, and they're mentored through all of the different processes and protocols that are necessary within that department. And so in a healthcare setting, mentor-mentee relationships do exist. The question is, do they exist for emergency managers? And how can you find that one? And from the mentee's perspective, respect and shared values form the trust needed to learn and grow. In addition, a great mentor embodies the following characteristics as noted on the slide here: committed, confident, and competent. In committed, which is defined as guiding and supporting an individual's professional and personal growth through investment in time, energy, and effort. This was seen in my experience. So when I was in Emma and I worked together, which I'll go a little bit into the history of how we were partnered together. But when our commitment began really as a weekly meeting and creating a project development timeline and a management framework to form the structure of the work that we did together. In terms of the characteristic of confidence, sharing experiences, advice, credit, and encouragement, offering a network of contacts and resources freely. Emma offered support and advocacy for my role at the hospital. So not just, emergency preparedness coordinator as an integral part of the hospital's overall functionality, but eventually in directing me into higher leadership positions. Initially, when I joined in my role as the emergency preparedness coordinator at Mammoth Hospital, the emergency preparedness coordinator role was specific to the emergency department. But through Emma's experience, her advice, and her encouragement, She helped me advocate for myself to be moved more in an executive role so that I could have a greater hospital-wide reach, and impact the hospital in a more dynamic way. And finally, the characteristics of competence. I've gained an immense amount of shared knowledge and skill inspired by my mentor's encouragement to continually seek out best practices and collaboration within the emergency management realm. And so a mentor who is competent is knowledgeable. They are experienced. They utilize interpersonal skills and good judgment. All of these characteristics make up a really qualified and well-rounded mentor. Okay, next survey. So again, showing in the chat, answer this question. What is the most important to consider for the successful functionality of a mentorship program? And your options here are financial resources, human resources, which includes the pool of mentors and the pool of mentees. Is it mentor training? Is it organizational or leadership support? Oops, sorry. Or is it clear expectations and goals? So go ahead and put your answers in the chat. What do you think is most important to consider for the successful functionality of a mentor program? Okay, we have somebody saying consistency and constant feedback is essential for effective training guidelines. The pool of mentors and mentees, human resources, clear expectations and goals. Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you all for contributing there. It's very interesting to see what's important to each of us. And from my perspective and the perspective of the mentor-mentee relationship that I was in, all of these characteristics are integral to a successful relationship. But most importantly, for the experience that I was in, it was the mentor training, which in this presentation, we'll reference more as characteristics of a mentor, really, which is that ability to guide versus dictate. And also the leadership support aspect, which really moved my role from an emergency department only perspective to a hospital-wide role that impacted all departments. Okay, characteristics of a mentorship. So mentorship thrives when supported by a structured format and clear expectations. Programs like the International Association of Emergency Managers, in California, the California Emergency Services Association, and other associations formalize mentorship processes, making them accessible and sustainable. And without going over every part of this slide, it is important to note that mentorship comes in two formats, formal and informal, but they are not mutually exclusive. So the format that you see here, this table, this information came from a study done by FEMA on workforce mentorship programs for deployed incident staff. And so ultimately, what they did was they interviewed a number of the deployed incident staff, asking them how the mentorship program that was established through FEMA supported their ability to carry out their objectives, and fulfill their role in emergency management. And what you can see here is that in the formal and informal columns, establishing a formal program in any sort of context is less common. It's more common and easier to establish an informal mentorship. And that really is due to the fact that informal mentorships ultimately are determined by commitment, the commitment of the mentor and the mentee, or ultimately the personal connection and relationship that is happening between those two parties. Whereas a formal mentorship really is determined by funding from the program. So ultimately, if there is no funding for a mentorship program to be established, the objective of somebody who's looking for a mentorship program, they do need to go out and do it in a more informal manner. And again, the other thing that came up in your response for what's important is those clear expectations and goals. In a formal mentorship, they can be required. There may be documentation that needs to be filled out to write down what it is that's going to occur within the mentorship relationship, and then follow up activities that ensure and evaluate whether or not those objectives were met. And an informal mentorship, again, based on the relationship and the commitment between the two parties, clear expectations and goals may not be documented in the same formal manner, so it's not as consistent. It doesn't mean that it's not as important or it's not as fruitful. They're just different. And they're important to note here because you may be in a situation or a context or employment where funding for a formal mentorship doesn't exist, but you are maybe looking for or wanting to become a mentor. And so building relationships and understanding where either you are going to be most useful or maybe where somebody might have some information that is useful to you is going to be that is going to be determined by your effort and consistency. And so just to give you a little background, when I was hired as this emergency preparedness coordinator at Mammoth Hospital, as I mentioned, was hired with the caveat that I'd be working with a more experienced emergency manager. And the way that Emma was brought on into Mammoth Hospital, which we did not have a formal emergency management mentorship program, but instead the position was open for the emergency preparedness coordinator. Emma, my mentor, happened to see it, in one of these job posting areas, and having the experience that she had, and she lived in a different city, and she wasn't really interested necessarily in moving to Mammoth or taking on the emergency preparedness coordinator role because it was more of an entry level role. Um, she was interested in potentially supporting the development of somebody in this person. So she contacted the hospital on her own and said, "Look, I'm interested in helping you develop somebody in this role if it's necessary. If you have somebody in mind that you'd like to fill this position, I'd like to offer my services to mentor them." And the hospital thought it was a great idea. We live in a rural community with limited resources, which includes, people, trained people, educated and experienced people. And even though, again, I came right with the right skill sets, my training wasn't there. And so that's how my partnership with my mentor began. It started off formally, but really it ended up being carried out in a more informal manner. Um, and really, our informal mentorship ultimately was determined by the commitment within our relationship. So the first time we met was kind of like a blind date. We met at a Starbucks and we got to know each other a little bit better. And then we quickly established a very collaborative relationship, where we made our decisions within alignment. And ultimately, our work was driven by my increased understanding of the emergency management role, the project objectives necessary for the hospital and its program, and then also driven by my ability to take on greater hospital-wide responsibilities. And so the summary of this slide really is that things can start off formally and they can take on an informal nature. Or if a formal relationship is not available to you, creating a mentorship is something that is available to you with the right drive and consistency and alignment with other more experienced mentors if you're a mentee. Um, and if you're a mentor, if you're seeking out to support the growth and development of a new emergency manager, looking for places in which you may be most useful. So, mentorship program resources. When mentorship programs are built on respect and clear expectations, mentees gain confidence that the guidance they receive is credible and lasting. And, I definitely would say that my role in emergency management is proof of this. And I did some research. And again, some of these organizations here are based in the United States. I know this is a Canada-based training program. But ultimately, if you research emergency management mentorship opportunities, there are many available, and each of them are niched in terms of the type of emergency manager that you want to become, maybe the place that you came from before you entered the emergency management profession. And so, for example, I belong to the International Association of Emergency Managers as I'm working through my application to become a certified emergency manager. And they offer mentors for anybody who's in that position and then helps them guide them through that particular process. Um, the California Emergency Services Association also has a mentorship program for newcomers to the seasoned professional connections. And again, this is emergency services focused. In fact, I belong to this organization as well. And recently, there was a newly graduated emergency management student who was looking to understand where she might want to go in the emergency management field. And she visited some of these associations and looked into the members. And she reached out to me. She said, and because she wanted to talk to me a little bit about what I was doing. And the reason she reached out to me in particular was because I was the only member who was in a healthcare setting as an emergency manager. So you can see maybe how there are mentorship programs out there for emergency managers, but depending on the niche that you're working in, the mentors need to be aligned with your professional and personal goals. So I work in healthcare. She was maybe looking for some healthcare information. We have some other ones here I've listed where HQE Systems has a mentorship program specifically for veterans. Center for Public Safety Excellence, specifically for people coming into the fire and emergency services. So there are many programs out there. But again, it's important to note that when you're either looking for a mentorship program, looking to establish a mentorship program, or you are looking to become a mentor yourself, it is important to align your experience with the program or the individual that you would be entering a relationship with. And so, with even all these resources available, how does one choose the right mentor? And so, choosing a mentor. Choosing a mentor isn't just about credentials, it's about fit. Shared values, communication style, and personal connection make the relationship effective. Studies show that mismatches in expectations or values are the most common causes of failed mentorships. The most successful mentoring partnerships are those in which the mentee takes the initiative and truly drives the partnership. In a mentee-driven partnership, the mentee determines the pace, the route, and the destination. The best mentors, based on the research that I've done, tailor their guidance to the mentee's individual needs. They don't apply a one-size-fits-all solution. And so, as I mentioned previously, coming from a background of event management, training and education, and a bit of healthcare as well, my needs really were focused on education and training in the emergency management space. So we know that, for example, in the United States, there's the FEMA basic courses that anybody can take. Their independent study. They're also required of any emergency management person, but they're relatively vague and are not really hands-on training. And so my mentor provided encouragement and advice on the most helpful initial and advanced educational courses that I should focus on to achieve my future or professional goals. She also provided templates, many, many templates to create a foundation for a comprehensive program, which saved me a lot of time and effort to have to glean and research unending amounts of information and other drafts and templates that are available in the emergency management, interwebs. Um, and so, as we see here, when you're seeking out an experienced peer, you want them to have the following qualities. So, interest in developing your career. The mentor does have to have some kind of interest and uh, enthusiasm for helping another person in their professional career and be committed to that mentorship relationship. Professional needs should be aligned. As I mentioned before, having an emergency manager from a county level may not exactly appreciate the information and processes that occur at a hospital level. And so it's important to make sure that the mentor-mentee professionals are in alignment from the beginning. Again, we talked about professional competence, successful track record in mentoring. Everybody has to start somewhere. Even if your first time ever mentoring somebody, do your best. As long as you are trying your best to develop somebody else's career, to contribute yourself to the benefit of others, your track record will be successful. Good communication skills are also really important between the pair. And as well, providing those networking opportunities. It's not just that one-on-one relationship that's so important, but it's really what can the mentor offer in terms of opening up the field of emergency management for a new mentee, a new disaster coordinator. Institutionally savvy, having information about how to navigate programs, processes, institutions, facilities, working with different levels within that space as well. Being like-minded. So again, you'll hear through this presentation that that personal relationship, that connection between the mentor and mentee is so important that they have similar ideas about the world ultimately. And the potential for reciprocity. Mentees can offer a lot of information to mentors as well in this ever-changing world of technology and processes. So choosing a mentor, keeping these things in mind is such an important aspect. And the mentor then is able to offer insight and counsel that is focused on the mentee's objectives. And so once you've found a mentor, the real work begins, and that's establishing and nurturing the relationship. So launching a mentorship requires intention. Setting clear expectations, defining goals, and scheduling regular meetings creates the foundation for success. Without this clarity, even well-intentioned mentorships can falter. And so, as I mentioned in our initial relationship development, the mentor, Emma, and myself, we met at a Starbucks. We got to know each other a little bit. We established our working relationship, which we decided was going to be both in person as needed, but also from a remote standpoint. So we constantly met online to touch base. And we also identified how often we would meet and ultimately the content of our engagement. And so, as I mentioned, our informal relationship didn't necessarily have documented clear goals and expectations, but we did know what it was we were working towards, which was really based on my needs and priorities, as well as the priorities and needs of the program that I was running. And so, based on the informal nature of our relationship, we defined outcomes based on projects, completed tasks, whether or not we needed to exercise or execute an exercise, as well as the short and long-term goals of the emergency management program at the hospital. And ultimately, our long-term goal was to establish a comprehensive and functional program, basically because when I came into that space, there was a emergency management concepts, but there really was no structured program. And so that was ultimately our goal. And you can see that we defined our outcomes, as I mentioned here. A few of these things, as mentioned on previous slides as well. Emma helps share resources and best practices, often through providing templates and especially of annex plans and things like that. And then also encouraged me to create education and training for the staff, and also to follow up on education and training for myself. And so ultimately, the success of the relationship is in the evaluation of the outcomes. And so on this slide, I've just listed some inquiries when in a mentorship relationship to utilize in evaluating whether or not your relationship has been successful. And they center around these following questions. Are the mentee's goals realistic, clear, and well-defined? Has the mentor met the mentee's expectations? Was success achieved within the relationship timeframe? Does the mentee need ongoing support? Are they consistent and committed? Is the mentee open to receiving feedback or willing to modify their behaviors to reach a success point? And what additional resources or tools are needed to achieve continued success? And once these foundations are in place, the benefits of the relationship start to flow and not just for the mentee. Okay, next survey. So in the chat, rate the long-term benefits of a mentorship-led emergency management program on participants' careers. So in other words, what do you believe is the number one long-term benefit of a mentorship program for emergency managers over the course of their career? Is it increased confidence and self-esteem? Is it stronger professional relationships? Is it personal growth and development, personal satisfaction and fulfillment, or enhanced leadership skills and networking opportunities? And you can go ahead and drop your thoughts in the chat. Okay, we see enhanced leadership skills and networking, confidence in the role, growth and development, leadership skills, personal development. Personal growth and development as well, enhanced leadership skills, great. Perfect. Yeah. So really the long-term benefits of a mentorship in emergency management over the long term are every single one of these answers. It really just depends on what it is that you're focused on, but ultimately the outcome are really a more enhanced and robust professional career, not just because of your increased knowledge and skills, but also because of your ability to network and lead groups. And this is just a really great quote here. While once viewed as one directional, flowing from the mentor to the mentee, the concept of high quality connections offers a broader view of mentoring where both or all parties benefit from growth. And again, this came out of the analysis of that FEMA research document I had mentioned earlier in the presentation. And so mentorship is reciprocal. Both parties benefit deeply. For mentees, it's confidence, skill development, and career growth. For mentors, it's personal fulfillment, leadership growth, and a lasting legacy. And as noted before, there are many benefits to both participating sides. For example, a mentor helps mentees navigate challenges, make decisions, and set goals, provides emotional support, can celebrate the successes, and help mentees stay motivated. They can share their experience, or excuse me, their expertise, their industry knowledge, and their personal experiences. Mentors can connect their mentees with valuable resources and people. They can demonstrate the skills and behaviors that they want their mentees to develop. And they can help mentees identify areas for improvement and develop new skills, as well as challenge mentees to think critically, explore new ideas, and pursue their full potential. And now that we've looked at what mentorship is, we'll shift into how it plays out in the field through the initial action plan for new disaster coordinators. And I think I sent Caitlin you some documentation so it can be downloaded, just a number of templates that were provided to me in my initial entry into emergency preparedness. And many of the things that we're going to go over in the next few slides, you'll see in that downloadable packet. And so stepping into the role of a disaster coordinator can feel overwhelming. A structured action plan breaks down the challenge into clear, manageable steps. Mentorship becomes the guidepost through these stages. And so I'll be offering here 3 key takeaways to get any new disaster coordinator started. Number 1, get to know the organization. Number 2, create an engaged network. And number 3, become the expert. And the first step is foundational, knowing your organization. New disaster coordinators must look in all directions, past, present, and future, to create an overarching plan to meet requirements and support the ongoing program. And so action 1, knowing your organization. Every effective disaster coordinator starts with deep knowledge of their facility, hazards, and regulatory requirements. Understanding this landscape is the cornerstone of preparedness. And getting to know the organization really looks like asking yourself, what are the real life incidents that impact my facility, my organization, or my jurisdiction? Specifically, what are the top 10 hazards? And what can I expect to prepare for? And so there are many unique risks associated with every facility, patient populations, community resources, but in particular, and especially like in my experience living and working in a rural community, Are there cyclical large scale events occurring in our facility, or not really in our facility, but in our community, for example? Every single weekend in the summer, there's a large music event that is free and gathers a lot of people. There's one extra large event where 7,000 people can be gathered in the same wooded area. And our resources of the community, like our EMS agencies, our one hospital, it's important for us to prepare for the possibility of something happening during that time. Knowing your seasonal and natural features of a location, of course, in Mammoth Lakes, we live at 8,000 feet. And so understanding our seasonal weather patterns, our limitations in terms of road closures or distance to the next closest trauma station are very important in terms of understanding our organization. And then, are there any upcoming or pending facility plans? So, are you building a new wing and need to develop plans on evacuation or surge preparations for that space? Do you have any upcoming um, surveys of that type? And knowledge of these real life incidents will lead to supporting building relationships, knowing who it is that you need to talk to either within your facility or adjacent to your community facility to better have a better knowledge overall of your emergency management hazards. This will enhance your response capabilities and help to create foundation for your program. Also, as part of knowing your organization, it's important to understand your accreditation surveys and requirements. In California and across the United States, there's a well-known survey group called the Joint Commission, which follows in California in particular, the California Medicaid and Medicare services guidelines. And so, having a mentor to direct you to the various knowledge libraries, having a mentor help you translate standards, which can be convoluted and confusing sometimes. Emergency management is its own language. Um, Understanding how to document accreditation surveys and complete your requirements, having a mentor there with you is so helpful. And also to help you navigate where you might find some guidance to make things easier for yourself, not to reinvent the wheel. And then also having a mentor helps you understand, when you know your regulations, what is it that I need to be scheduling across the next year or two? Maybe understanding what already is scheduled and what is my role and responsibility in carrying out that exercise or training. And then ultimately aligning your regulations and your requirements with your timeline is a really important skill to have. And a mentor can support you in developing and understanding how to project manage certain plans and programs. It's important here as well, finally, in terms of an accreditation, depending on your standing in a survey window, the timeline in which an accreditation body may come to your facility, this will help determine your prioritization of projects moving forward. And a mentor can really be like your sounding board for understanding what that timeline looks like. And so once you have known your organization, you can expect the following outcomes: clarification of your requirements, maybe even documentation and templates, whether that's from your mentor or understanding where to look for those things. You can prepare for your surveys in a confident manner. You can understand the top 10 hazards for your facilities and then ultimately create a training and exercise schedule that is sustainable. And once you're grounded in the organization, the next task is to build your connections outward. A great quote here: successful new disaster coordinators are tasked to develop engaged and cooperative relationships with stakeholders and colleagues in and outside of their facility or direct community. And so step 2, action 2, creating an engaged network. Ultimately, what you want to do to create an engaged network is you want to ask yourself, who is currently engaged in my emergency management program or in emergency management for my facility or my community? And how can the interest and engagement be increased or enhanced? And here, what I've noted is emergency preparedness committee. At our hospital, having an emergency preparedness committee helps to bring all emergency management concepts and decisions to a group of subject matter experts. It was important, at least for me, in terms of developing my emergency preparedness committee, to create an agreement or a charter that drives the work of the committee, that talks about what kind of things that we are going to accomplish each year, the frequency of our meetings, also what I'm going to talk about within each of my committee meetings. Everybody only has a limited amount of time. They want their information very succinct and tight. And so having an agreement or charter to define the frequency and content of these committee meetings is very important. It's almost like having a procedures manual. And then ultimately, whoever's in your committee, whoever is engaged, understanding what kind of education and training they need to become core members. Having a mentor direct and advise on who she had the most experience with in terms of high engagement really helped me understand that engagement changes over time. Transitions happen within facilities. And so ensuring that you have your eyes on maybe the beginning of developing an emergency response team within your hospital, calling upon people who are showing interest and enthusiasm for emergency management and cultivating relationships with those people. Because emergency management is not a solo act. Coordinators succeed by fostering collaboration across committees, coalitions, and community partners. And networks thrive when they're built on trust and shared values. And with the support of my mentor, I learned to engage stakeholders respectfully and build durable networks. And part two of engaging a creative network, again, as I mentioned, your county coalition and agency partners within your community are really important to get to know, to build relationships with, and to kind of understand what it is that they have in mind for their emergency management programs as well. And really asking yourself, how can I be more engaged to inspire others to be engaged along with me within my program? And so I've noted here, in particular, understanding budgets and grants. Relationship building opens up new doors to further enhance your program. In the United States right now, in particular, we have lots of cuts happening to the funding for our hospital preparedness program. And it'll be important for me to engage with the other departments, understanding what their budgets are and where emergency management might fit into their budgets annually. Also to engage with our community and community partners to create multi-jurisdictional or multi-agency exercises and training so that we can split the cost or maybe find additional funding for things that we want to get done. And then also other supports within the healthcare system. As I mentioned previously, there are memberships for emergency management associations. You're basically joining a pool of potential mentors, potential mentees, subject matter experts, free education, advice, guidance. These memberships are really, really important for things like asking questions about very specific incidents. Maybe you get on their newsletter and something comes across your desk and you think to yourself, oh gosh, this applies to my hospital. And so it's really good to get yourself engaged within these associations. I also noted social networks and podcasts. Right now, especially in the winter of 22 to 23, we had a massive weather system come through and drop 70 feet of snow in our community, which ended up becoming a state of emergency declared by the president. And during that time, I began to follow every single social network or social handle of all of our partner agencies, of any hazard specific social media handle like Caltrans showing anything about road closures. And then I started to share those things on my own personal page so that I had a consistent flow of information about emergency management or emergency preparations coming from myself. So I could begin to create the perspective of an emergency manager, even from my own personal stance. And then, of course, there's some really amazing podcasts out there that provide subject matter expert intuition, advice, and expertise on a range of all kinds of topics. Oops, whoops, sorry, too ahead of myself. Okay, so action two outcomes. So once you engage your network, you can expect ultimately to have developed some really great working relationships, not just inside your facility, but also outside and in your community. You can begin to create a foundation for great education for the staff and the leadership within your facility. You may engage in your coalition by participating in other exercises and trainings that they put on, inviting people from your facility to go to those as well. Perhaps you might even find additional funding for your program. And then ultimately, you begin to embody an emergency management mindset in all areas of your life, and professional and personal. And so training is everything. The peach was once a bitter almond. Cauliflower is nothing but cabbage with a college education. And so moving on to action three, becoming the expert. The important ultimate goal of mentorship really is to develop confident, competent leaders. And new disaster coordinators must grow into experts who lead exercises, educate staff, and shape programs. And so, what is this slide really about? Training. As we talk about exercises, training comes before an exercise so that the people who are participating in an exercise have an idea of what it is that they are responsible for. What is their role and responsibility? What are the processes that we're testing here? It's the same thing when you want to build your program. Looking for trainings from a variety of resources and libraries. Again, my mentor pointed out to me some really great resource platforms for me to understand better maybe the types of exercises that we wanted to put on. Getting training in emergency operations plan development. There's some, at least in the United States, I'm not sure about Canada, but there's a Center for Domestic Preparedness in Alabama that puts on, in-person programs to help the new emergency manager really dive deeply into what it means to develop an emergency operations plan for their facility. We have HSEAT program here, the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, which also helps to develop the emergency manager's perspective of planning when it comes to developing a program that's sustainable over time. They currently train on something called the Integrated Preparedness Program, which previously was called the Multi-Year Training and Exercise Program. But ultimately, all of that to say is that it takes some skill and time and really input from the stakeholders in your facility to create a sustainable program. And it's important to create those relationships to get people involved in that development. And then ultimately to attend conferences. Just 2 weeks ago, we went to the California Hospital Association Disaster Planning Conference. Any kind of conference that an emergency manager can go to listen to lessons learned from other facilities that may be just like theirs, or find new ways of doing things to make that more efficient, understandable, and sustainable for their staff and their teams. Conferences are a great place to train to build your program. And then ultimately, engaging your leadership in training is the most important part of becoming an expert. Having that relationship with the leadership team so that they understand that their role, not only in facilitating emergency management, but in influencing, even in a hospital setting, influencing the entire hospital-wide staff to perceive emergency preparedness as an essential function for hospital-wide performance. So getting that leadership engaged, training them in emergency management concepts that apply to the roles that they might take on, maybe developing a hospital emergency response team, and then ultimately really understanding the whole community of the hospital as well as of the external community from your facility or your hospital, so that the leadership have a complete picture of emergency management. And finally, implementing the training into the program. So in this particular slide, what I'm guiding you to ask yourself here is, where do my own strengths lie and when am I most energized? So training can be super dry. It can be really structural. It can be very difficult sometimes to wrap your brain around. ultimately, as the emergency manager, it's your job to understand the training and then bring it to the staff, to your facility in a way that is impactful and sustaining for them. And so, I've listed a few things here. You can do a lunch and learn. Everybody, loves a free lunch to learn something new. Maybe you want to bring somebody into your facility to speak on a certain topic. Maybe you just want to provide a list of resources for people to look at. Maybe that's the way that other people are best reached. Perhaps you want to gather your subject matter experts in your facility to help create an input on plans through work groups. And again, then there's drills and exercises, and then of course gathering feedback from anything that you do. But the goal here in this slide really is to encourage you to apply your trainings to your teams in a way that is engaging and fun, for lack of a better word. Because, if you're not having fun, typically no one else is having fun either. And so it's important to implement your training in a way that feels right for you. And if you've carried out, some of these notions in action 3, you can expect to develop your emergency management program. You can expect to have leadership engagement, to have that executive support person who's there for you, to have key staff educated to begin to develop your hospital emergency response team, and then ultimately to execute your exercises and evaluate your program in a meaningful way to continue building and growing. And all of these lessons tie back to the research and best practices guiding mentorship across emergency management. And here's just a slide giving you a couple references here that I used for this presentation. And just to close us out here, the approach I took today draws on both field-tested best practices and empirical research. Together, they give us the framework rooted in evidence and human connection. Mentorship is not just a professional courtesy, it's a force multiplier for excellence and resilience. In the emergency management field, it means ensuring that lessons learned from the past are not lost, but carried forward to strengthen future leaders. And for mentors, the call is to share their wisdom and generosity with patience and integrity. For mentees, the call is to seek guidance with openness, humility, and determination. And together we can create a culture of mentorship that ensures no new or experienced coordinator stands alone in a crisis. Because when we build each other up, we strengthen not only our profession, but the safety and resilience of every community we serve. And so the challenge for you leaving here today is to ask yourself, who can I mentor and who might mentor me? And thank you so much. And I appreciate all of your time today. And any questions, I guess, put in the chat or raise your hand, whatever feels good to you.
Perfect. It looks like Jen will email you some questions later, which is great. We have a minute, so maybe I'll ask a quick one. You talked about choosing a mentor, but how do you really find a mentor?
Good question. So finding a mentor really it's kind of like dating in many ways. Um, you know, it's important to know what your goals are as the mentee. So, for example, if you're a new disaster coordinator and your dream is to work in events, large scale events like FIFA World Cup is coming to your town, and you want to be the emergency manager that's ensuring the security and safety of that event, what I would suggest is looking into who's doing that right now. Who in the emergency management space has the job, the role, the responsibilities that you aspire to? And begin to reach out and connect with that person, maybe ask questions, follow them socially, Is there a conference that you can attend that is on that specific subject, that type of thing, and then begin to create a relationship just by asking questions, letting somebody know like that you actually are looking to aspire to a role that they may be in, and do they have any guidance for you in terms of education and training or conferences that you should attend, or any sort of other activities that maybe driving you into that next space. So um, just keeping your eyes open for somebody who may be in the position that you are looking to be in the next 5, 10 years, and beginning to create a relationship with that person or within that network of space.
Perfect. That makes so much sense. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming and chatting with us today.
Thank
It's
you.
almost the top of the hour, so we can close out now. And if you're comfortable with folks sending you an email to direct any other future questions or comments that way, maybe they can connect with you there.
Yeah, and there's my email right there. Great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much again. And have a great rest of your night, everyone. Thanks for coming out.
Okay. Should I stop recording?
Yeah, that'd be great.